I already see so many great social builders building amazing things within the Web3 social realm. And again, if you care about Web3 social, I think Mask, you should definitely feel supported by Mask. And we have a lot of colleagues on the scene, so talk to them, talk to us. We want to help. So I have a question. Who knows the Bitcoin price right now? I'm really curious.
Yell it out.
How much is it? How much is it? I heard it reached 60K today. I want to use Bitcoin price to introduce the next panel topic simply because I often find myself stuck in this dilemma where on the one side, I was surrounded by pretty much the most brilliant builders, innovators, computer scientists, cryptographers in the space. But on the other hand, oftentimes I find myself sitting in this trillion-dollar casino. So do you feel like you're in an innovation hub or a casino, three of you? Casino.
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 Yeah.
I'm going to say innovation hub.
Innovation hub. OK. Two to one. Fair, fair. I'm really, really looking forward to this panel topic, which is SocialFi versus Web3 social. So this topic is going to talk about the hyper-financialization of Web3 social in this space. And we have our great colleague, Lawson, to moderate this panel, and James, Lucas, and Nir to be the panelists. So let's give them a round of applause. Really, really looking forward to it. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Afra. James Young, if you're here, head on down. So we got two of our panelist guests. I'll do some intros, maybe see if James Young can make it out as well. So I'm Lawson Bae, founder of Rara, a social curation protocol, and that recently, last year, joined the Mask team as well. I am just incredibly excited about Web3 social, decentralized social, SocialFi. I don't care what you call it, but a social media and an internet where we can connect with each other and say things that aren't always, allow for debate, open debate, and take society online and those things online. And so we've designed this panel, SocialFi versus decentralized, SocialFi versus Web3 social, to kind of talk about these ideas of how to strike a balance between the ethos of decentralization and composability and all these like buzzwords we say of why we're in crypto versus the financialization. Bitcoin started this. Bitcoin is money, right? And so in that kind of straddle, we've struggled, I think, to find ways to both attract users while also not feel like it's a car sales lot. A lot of times the social media, Web3 social platforms can feel like someone's always trying to sell you something. And as a new user, that's not super appealing. So first, I want to do quick introductions. We have Nir, 2 seats over to me, founder of the Yup protocol and the Yup app. Yup was a very early social protocol in the space as well, before Web3 social was even a term. Yup definitely kind of paved a lot of the path of, honestly, a lot of the things we're seeing today. And a year and a half ago, I think, they launched the Yup mobile app that brings together multiple decentralized protocols. Nir, you want to say hello?
Yeah, hey everyone. Hope you're doing well. Working on Yup. It's a Web3 social aggregator, so imagine Lens, Farcaster, Twitter, Blue Sky in one app. We see ourselves as a gateway to Web3 social, sort of creator-focused. The key way people use Yup today is to cross-post between those different platforms. And just super excited to be here with some builders, very motivated. Think this is very much the year for both Web3 social and SocialFi, whatever we choose to call it, right?
Yes, yeah, so don't care what we call it. We just need more users and need more games to play. Yep. Very bullish on Yup, very bullish on aggregating and bringing the different networks together. And so next up we have Lucas from Pods, founder of Pods. Prior to Pods, Lucas was with the Bankless team. It's kind of like probably the top tier media team in the space. Lucas actually helped launch and ran a lot of their podcasts, and so naturally he turned that into a product. Lucas.
Yeah, absolutely. What's up, everyone? Thank you for coming. So I'm the founder of Pods, or Pods.media, and we help bring podcasts on chain. So we allow podcast hosts to easily publish their episodes on chain to bring this new monetization model that's not advertisement based, and then also build a social graph of their fans. So finding, the individuals behind their fan base.
Really cool.
All right. Cool. So I'm going to ask a few questions for the whole panel, and then each of you kind of get your own questions, and everybody else can kind of jump into opine on it as well. I guess just to start off, each of you are building apps that maybe have some Web3 social ethos in it, along with some financialization ethos in it. Why don't you just briefly tell us who is your power user of your app, and what are they getting out of it?
I would say the power user of Yup is a Web3 social creator, someone who's probably spending a majority of their time on a Web3 social protocol like Lens or Farcaster, or even more open social protocols like Blue Sky, but often is doing that alongside using at least one of these other platforms. If it's not Twitter, then it's one of these other social protocols, and wants to be able to kind of do that and engage from one place. For example, I believe Bankless is a Yup user. Ryan Selkis, who's a big Yup user, kind of describes it as a insurance policy on his social graph, a way for him to, without changing his behavior, be able to engage with audiences on new protocols while still targeting his audience on Twitter. But over time is building that audience on these new protocols and is able to engage with them through Yup.
Yeah, so I really like the Yup proposition, helping people stay in touch with their audiences. Again, Bankless, where Lucas was previously, has audiences across Twitter, but on lots of other platforms. At Mask, we have Firefly app, which provides a lot of similar kind of keeping in touch with your different friends and followers and the people you connect with in the space across these networks. Nir, I'm curious, how much of your users do you feel like are just trying to keep in touch with their fans, or maybe on the other side, trying to stay on top of the alpha on the different networks?
I think it's a good mix of both. I think probably right now a bit more on the keeping in touch side. It's unclear where value will accrue, I think, for Web3 social and these protocols. I think people see Yup as a way to kind of engage with all of them. But I think to your point, we're in a place right now where these Web3 social protocols are quite composable and interoperable, but we haven't seen certain ones win out. And so it's very common for these creators to have, like we said about Bankless and others, to have some of their audience in each of these places, right? And to be able to engage with all of them from one place is an enormous advantage. I would say our killer feature is definitely being able to create content and engage with that audience, but we see at scale an opportunity to just continue to be able to grow the audience and see the alpha that's coming from that. I think what a really great example here is we have a lot of users that were, Farcaster has had a few really strong weeks, and a lot of our users ahead of those weeks have been able to kind of build audiences on Farcaster, have a footprint on Farcaster before it's gotten larger, and potentially even be rewarded for that, right? In the context of the SocialFi conversation that we're having, I think DGen is a good example of a meme coin that's come out of Farcaster that a lot of our users whose primary client or primary protocol wasn't Farcaster were able to participate in kind of by using Yup. And so I think from a creator angle, there's been some interesting alpha for users who primarily use Yup, and I think that's really awesome.
Yeah, no, so I love that. So, I like to think about these different networks as they have superpowers. The current superpower of Lens, for example, is everything can be financialized. Everything can be an entity if you want it to be an entity. And it can be a free mint or it can be a paid mint. But it's native to everything, financialization. And it's almost like the tech is the superpower. While Farcaster on the other side, there's good argument that the superpower was the original network, the original people who were invited into those spaces to create both a vibe and to give it some sort of weird mission alignment. For me, I think Farcaster definitely focused very heavily on other builders. To me, it feels very much like the 2017, 2018 conversations we could have or maybe 2018, 2019 conversations we could have on crypto Twitter that got lost when we turned into the car sales lot.
The casino, yeah.
But Lucas, I mean, what are your kind of thoughts on the different networks and how you see those, maybe the superpowers of those?
Yeah, I mean, I think the social graph right now of all these networks is really unique. I think the superpower right now for Farcaster was the Frames launch, and like that was an entirely new primitive that allowed you to interact with an application like Pods and mint a podcast directly, without leaving the application, without signing a transaction, without paying for gas. And those unique primitives that are enabled by Web3 Social, I think are the superpowers. And we're starting to just, we're going down that tech tree right now of just like exploring the possibilities of Web3 Social and, the composability of these social graphs that are being created on these platforms.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. So, just to really like hit that nail on the head again one more time, you had mentioned DGen. DGen was given out to people who were in the DGen channel on Farcaster. And so there was an alpha opportunity, literally an airdrop. I think another good example of that is early base announcements and early base features were only given and announced on Farcaster first. Yep. I think it's more of an underexplored use case for networks. A lot of people want to cross-post, but I think there's actually really good opportunities to be laser focused on what you're asking those networks to do. And I think Base did a really good, interesting example of that. A Lens on the side, I like Lens too. I like the tech. I think they've made a lot of really big ethos bets that these things will all be on chain and everything should be mintable. But with that comes with it obviously scalability problems. But from if I think about the Lens community, especially in the context of Pods, it's very much like, how do we get musicians using this? How do we get people who create content to be able to make money on that? I'm curious, like, how do you see people's ability when the creators keep touching their audiences? Is there a thought or a process to, could they make money using something like Yep?
Well, I think I see making money as secondary to achieving, I think, their core goal, which is to like reach their audience and have distribution. I really want to double click the value of Frames and what we've seen around them over the last couple of weeks. I mean, I think across the board, any project that's built a frame that's kind of relevant has seen like a 5x, 10x like increase in their conversion. So to the Pods example, for those that don't know Frames, they're basically links with actions that you can do directly from Farcaster or any Farcaster client. Lens has a version of this called Open Actions, but the Farcaster one has taken off more because of what Lawson said. The network on Farcaster has been very kind of builder-oriented. And so what we've seen is people kind of use these frames and leverage the distribution and the convenience of a one-click action from a social app to have just way higher conversion of whatever they're trying to achieve. So I think the best example I like to point to is like Paragraph and Mirror, which are essentially like publication platforms, Web3 publication platforms, have built out frames that essentially allow you to kind of read the article. Like if you share an article link in a post on Farcaster, you can actually read that article directly from the post and also subscribe to that publication directly from the post. And I think a lot of those publications are seeing a multiple increase in the number of people converting to become subscribers of their publication because of frames. And I think probably the same is true with Pods. The same is true with examples like free mints of various kinds. Certainly the case is for Yup. We've done a few interesting frames in the context of Farcaster that have had multiples of increase in conversion versus what we were doing, where you kind of had to go click on the link, go to the website, do something there. And so I think we're really at the tip of the iceberg of what can be done there. I'm surprised we haven't seen a lot of like wait list submissions where you could join a wait list directly from a frame, things like that. I think across the board, just multiples of conversion is really interesting.
Yup did the opposite, skip the wait lists, be able to get into Yup with a frame, which I loved.
Right.
So I'm gonna wrap the frames and we'll get. I want to do an intro for James here. I think the one thing that Frames really brought that is super interesting is just reducing the clicks for a call to action. That alone leads to serious conversion. And so super interested to see Frames be successful along with things like mods and other groups who are working on protocols that could take it across other networks. Okay, with that, I do want to make a quick introduction for James Young. I feel like the super panel for SocialFi and Web3 Social has now united.
I apologize for being late here.
Full context here. Ra-Ra's protocol started off very SocialFi. Basically, you could make money from NFTs going viral and you engaging with those NFTs early. Launched in the bear market, and we've seen that SocialFi really falls down in bear markets, and so we moved towards Web3 Social, being able to store data on NFTs as third parties and curate those NFTs. in a very similar way, Near and Yup started very heavily with your protocol in rewarding people to curate cool shit on the internet with the protocol, and being able to help bring that up to people in the Yup community. If other people thought that was great content, then you would get rewarded for that. And then the move towards the app, really more towards the Web3 social decentralization, composability kind of thought process. And so now we have James up here. James Young, founder of Collab.Land, the largest token gating product in the space. Really, if you've been in a Discord server ever or a Telegram in crypto, you've used Collab.Land. Who's also working on an upcoming release on a very interesting SocialFi project.
Thank you. And I apologize for being late. So kind of coming in out of context here, I can give you a background of
I did the intros. You can say something about that. But what we were talking about as you led up to it, basically, who are your power users, and are they getting something that's SocialFi out of it, or maybe something that's the more of the ethos of composability, keeping in touch with your networks?
Yeah. So, I've been thinking about it deeply the last couple of days here, knowing that I was going to be here and wanting to say something meaningful and insightful. And so, with that, what really, and this is just kind of raw off the top of my head here, and I would love to get feedback on this as well. What I really come to understand is, so let me give some background. Collab.Land, because I come from like the DAO tooling space, right? Just like organizational nerds. And I thought that Collab.Land first was just gonna be a DAO tool. We called it DAO Ops. And then like COVID happened, and then with DeFi summer, COVID, and then like this NFT thing happened. And it was actually my co-founder, who is my wife. We've never worked together, but we've been together for almost 30 years. And she's like, there's something here on like NFTs. I don't know what it is. And he's like, you shouldn't do or focus on DAOs. You should focus more on these like NFTs, because like she's not like natively crypto. She knew it adjacent to me. And she was like, I get this. I don't get like DAOs and voting and all that kind of stuff. And so, most of our communities are NFT communities. And now when I reflect back on that, I'm like, what happened? And I recently watched this documentary on Hypebeast. And what I realized was like, oh shit, like COVID lockdown happened at the kind of same time when all this reselling and Supreme kind of was fizzling out. And I feel like there is this like art, streetwear, cultural aspect that just because of COVID shifted online and gravitated more toward NFTs. So when I look at it, like I'm wearing doodles, it's like a status thing. And when I look at social, I don't, and when I think about it, I don't think about it from like a platform perspective, because Collab.Land, we don't have our own platform. We're on Telegram and Discord. I think of it more as like social as in like status. And it's like, and we did these like Collab.Land documentaries, and one was with Mintage, and the guy on the interview on Mintage was like, yeah, I can buy like a Gucci jacket, or I can, for a couple grand, or I can like equip my avatar, and I know it's from Gucci. And more people are gonna see it online, right, especially during COVID, than they're gonna see it in IRL. So, when we think now, fast forward, COVID is over, what's happening? I think, what I'm seeing in terms of social, and you gotta be really careful here, because you can get a lot of scammers and pump and dumpers. But I think you're gonna see, in kind of, when I look at the Collab.Land statistics, like January was our largest month in terms of growth, then peak bull.
Wow.
But and the growth is not happening just on one chain. So that's why it's a little bit more, I think, difficult to kind of have a higher level perspective on it. But I do see more of these like meme coins, and I never really got it. But I think now with this like cultural streetwear post-blur world, I still do believe in NFTs, but I think there is this cohort of people that are going to come into this next cycle on a social status based off of the meme coins that they get into early on. And that's what we're trying to do with our new product, Telefrens.
Yeah. I love that. And I think like tying back to your point, Lawson, earlier was like creator monetization, right? And the one thing that's I think is interesting, I'm going to tie this back to James's point in a second. But like monetization exists right now for media and for all this stuff. Like people are making bank off sponsorships. So the monetization piece of like Web3 social and SocialFi is like, it's nice. It's a new way to monetize that's not invasive from sponsors. Anyone can do it. That's really powerful. The really big piece that doesn't exist today is the status game and the social graph. When you're watching a YouTube video, you have no way to express your affinity for that piece of content, and you have no way to raise your hand and be like, I love this. And I have no way to prove that I was here on day one. And what putting the media on chain enables is allowing the individuals to express their affinity for that creator and gain some status with that creator. You know, you can then see that your top collector, the person that's been there since day one and has collected every single piece of content, whether it be $5 or $50, you know, you get this granular social graph of your biggest fans, and that to me is like the biggest unlock of like Web3 social and SocialFi is being able to identify your fan base and not just monetize them, because that exists already.
I love this. So this is actually, I want to take us to our second question. In traditional social media, Twitter, Facebook, and even in Web3 social, we have follow buttons and like buttons. And the video game of social is make number go up of how many people can I follow, how many people can follow me, and how viral a post I can make it go. And so the status is follower counts and a post going viral.
Right.
15 minutes of fame is the post going viral, and famous is follow count. And so as we move towards maybe more financialized things, where maybe it's not the number of followers or likes, it's literally a number. Like you've reached a market cap of something you're in, and you're provably in it early. And then this idea of meme coins and SocialFi being a mechanism to identify status, both that you were early, but literally a number that's spendable money. You've made money.
I think it's like, I think of it as like skin in the game. You're putting your money literally where your mouth is online, because otherwise you can say, oh yeah, I like this, love that, blah, 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 blah. Or you can bot your likes and your retweets. But it's very hard, and if you're doing that with your own capital, people are doing those kind of games, but it's just, it's not as sustainable. So I think that there's going to be different types of signals that are going to be rooted in, like, number go up kind of signals. I think it's going to be this next unlock when we have this narrative of like staking and restaking and yield. Because what if you're, you know, able to get some ETH, lock it up, and you're just playing with the yield. So it's kind of free money in a way. And I think that could help with this narrative of like, okay, like I'm learning about crypto, and I think that
But is that social? Take it social there. What about that social?
So that's not social, but that frees up the psychological mind space to play games. You're not investing. You're not trading. Because I think like this next cycle, if I were to, and this is what this hypothesis that we're vetting out through our new app Telefrens, is that this new type of trader is not going to look at candlestick charts, right? They're not doing TA. They're more like collectors, like NFT collectors, like Beanie Baby collectors, but they're doing it in this like rare digital kind of, or scarce digital asset.
They're coming in and reading the room and buying things, investing in things because of that.
And it's more of a social signal,
Yep.
right? And so I think that, I don't know exactly what it looks like, but that's is what it seems like is shaping up here, because you have onboarding, I think, kind of solved in a way with like account abstraction, and there's a lot of teams working on it. You have other types of technology like passkey, so you don't have to be so precious about like your seed phrase and your private key anymore. So I think that there's going to be a whole nother unlock of new participants in this cycle.
So let's dig more into the status element of it.
Sure, I'd love to.
Maybe Nir,
So I think
like,
there's
explain where you feel like the status is coming out of this game, and how does that add value to hanging out online?
Yeah, so I think there's two other forms of status we really haven't spoken about here. One that I think Collab.Land really fits into, which is access. Like, I think there's a notion of like FOMO about not being a part of a specific community that the token gating mechanism really ties into, and I think speaks to the kind of the true fans mechanism. But also speaking to what Lucas said, I think earliness is a form of status that Web3 is very good at, and Web3 social is really good at. You have proof on chain that you were early on something that ends up being valuable. And that value can happen in a financial sense, but I think it can happen in any sense, right? I mean, a good example of this in the context of Web3 social is like people really highly value their very low FIDs on Farcaster or Lens IDs, meaning I was the first 500 users. And I think Zuckerberg really picked up on this with Instagram threads, where they're actually showing which number user you were when you join Threads directly in your Instagram account. And I think it's trying to touch into this kind of like hipster I was in before it was cool energy that the ledger is insanely good at like proving.
It went immediately to 100 million though, so it's like, how could you tell the difference?
Well, I was 200,000. I was there on the first 20 minutes, and you know, if that ends up becoming the next Twitter, that's a really cool thing to have. But I think I kind of see free mints in this new wave as like checkpoints of the metaverse. It's like I was there at this time, here's the record of it, and now there's also some programmable art to go with that, and I think that's kind of a very powerful
And what's even
form
more
of status.
powerful is that is now composable. So I can now reward the first 100 FID people, and it's completely public. Like some restaking protocol could reward, you know, the early Farcaster users, and you don't have to ask permission. You don't need, like, that data is freely available, and that fully composable public data set is like such a huge unlock that doesn't exist anywhere, and that is like, for me, the bull case of all of this.
Yeah,
it's really interesting. It just had a thought there, like there was this whole thing where like 120 pages of Satoshi's like, you know, writings came out in the open, and he's like, if Bitcoin fails, the real use case that it will fit into is a timestamp.
Totally.
Yep.
You had to be there. Like if you have a Bitcoin wallet from 2010, that is the ultimate flex, because it's one that cannot be faked, right? And I think people highly value status symbols that cannot be faked. That's, I believe, why Bill Gates is trying very hard to get a Nobel Prize, because I think a majority of the world believes that that's impossible to fake. But there's a cost to that, right?
One of my favorite things about the Bitcoin blockchain is like addresses. Did it start with a 3, a 1? Did it start with a B? I love like looking at the addresses change over time and kind of like that weird signal as well.
Right.
I want to go back to the status thing one quick and then go to the next question, or just I guess make one comment, then we'll move on to it. I think the interesting thing about status that was in reference to the last questions panel, it's all public. When we're talking about status here, a lot of this does definitely feel like quick buck, moments in time on the internet, but it's not. You know, before, when you wanted to figure out how to be successful, you had to go talk to successful people and trust whatever the hell that they were telling you was true. You literally couldn't see the playbook. You just had to hear it through the grapevine. What's cool about the playbook in crypto is you can see it on the chain, and you can repeat it, and you can repeat it without talking to anybody. And I think the most exciting thing about the financialization and just everything that's happening in the space is it's basically like there are peaks and valleys of wealth and people all over the world. But crypto and SocialFi, I think, is going to be a really good tool to level the peaks and valleys. There's going to be a lot of wealth, and there already is a lot of wealth. People who are users of Rara's protocol are also users of Yub's protocol. These are people who are all over the world in countries that it's hard to make any amount of money, and SocialFi and crypto is bringing them up. It's leveling them. Okay, so I'm going to switch over. I'm going to send this next question. We've briefly talked about it already, but this question starts off for Lucas. There was a meme that was especially popular during the bear market as the NFT market crashed, and it became very hard to sell any NFTs to anybody. Free mints became wildly popular, or even mints that were so cheap they felt free. Zora did it probably the best, 0.000777 ETH. And so for Lucas, I think a part of your primary value pitch for Pods is it's just another revenue stream. And so the meme that happened during the bear market was minting, and specifically free minting is the new like. Is that hurting our value proposition to get new users?
Not at all. So I think the completely free mint, maybe, but like the Zora model of like a micro payment for a mint is very sustainable in the sense that
let's talk free mints first and then get into the Zora one. Maybe just address the free mint, pure free, and then get into the Zora one.
No, because like to the earlier discussion, like even a free mint still gives you social signal or status that you were there. So that still has value to creators. And honestly, like when I talk to a lot of podcasts, like the monetization piece is one part of it. And really like that social graph status thing of understanding who's there and who's listening and who's engaging with your content is like the piece that doesn't, like I'm a broken record right now, but like that is the piece that like gets creators fired up because that doesn't exist. So even in a free mint world, you know, that still has value because you're able to build a social graph of your audience of who's engaging with you. So, but that said, you know, I think Zora has the right model of like, can we do micropayments, share the revenue with the creator so that there's still revenue being generated?
For the crowd, why don't you maybe quickly explain how the Zora model works?
Yeah, so Zora charges a flat fee of 0.00777 ETH, which is about $2 right now. So it's actually gone up quite a bit since, you know, ETH is mooning. Let's go.
Add another zero.
Yeah, and then so what happens there is that Zora charges that flat fee, and then they end up splitting that fee amongst all of the participants. So if you were the creator there, you're earning a slice. If you referred the mint, you're earning a slice. If you were the first minter, which is actually a really unique mechanism, so if you were the first person to mint that NFT and you're actually bringing it on chain, so you're paying the gas fee with that mint, you're actually earning a slice of all future mints. So that really micro payment of like $1, $2, and then sharing it with the people that are engaging is like such a powerful model that, you know, is becoming pretty ubiquitous, you know, among creators right now.
I love this. I'll pass you a second. When you say engaging, I actually want to break that one down. I think the thing that social does today primarily is it tends to feel like a single player game, but crypto helps start to make it feel like a multiplayer game. DAOs are people doing something together, and the Zora model is a multiplayer game. People up and down the stack, both other app developers who integrate something like Zora, to also people who are sharing something, kind of like sharing a link. I'm curious, does anybody have any kind of thoughts on the multiplayer game aspect of that?
100%. I mean,
Yeah.
I think that referral mechanism and the attribution around it solves a lot of problems that I think Web2 Social hasn't been able to solve. And I mean, we at Yup, actually, when you cross-post a link from Zora, Manifold, anybody else, and anywhere else, we'll actually reference you as the referral address tied to that post, so that if anybody ends up minting that NFT because of your post on any of these platforms, you'll actually get credit for referring other people to it. And I think that credit alongside with that monetary return are both kind of really important and valuable to that end. I would also say, you know, I think it's interesting that I fully agree with everything Lucas said, and I think free mints have done nothing but support and help Web3 Social. What I have learned from my artist friends is how Zora's deviation into that focus, which I think has been highly profitable, has hurt the one-of-one NFTs and the art space that was emerging. And I think maybe we have a terminology challenge within Web3 Social in terms of how we bump against these other use cases of NFTs. And we have to think about, okay, how can art retain its advantage and how it leverages something like NFTs, even though we're now using it as something that looks much more like alike, to your point. And I think that's valuable, right? So finding that middle ground.
Sure. So I want to go back to Lucas again on this question. I'm a person with a podcast. I'm coming to you. You're saying I can make revenue or maybe even anything you're streaming, right?
Right.
Traditionally, when it's streamed in Web 2, they make money from the stream. To get access to listening to a lot of things, you've paid some service normally, or you're watching ads on YouTube. How do you see, again, the free mint specifically? There's no money being made, but it's available to be streamed for free. Did you hear that pushback any? That everyone can consume this without paying.
No, I think that's the beauty of it. Like, having maximum distribution on the content itself is still extremely powerful. Getting as many eyeballs in front of it is still very powerful, and that, does translate to a free mint. Even if it's completely free, maybe if it's forever, then like some of that value dissipates. But if it's a free mint, completely free for 7 days, that value will still kind of accrue as long as that video is still getting millions and millions of views on the back end. Only 100,000 people, might own that NFT, and there's some sort of speculatory value maybe on the SocialFi side of things, that can accrue to those collectors. So yeah, I would say, and like even on the back end of that, like you can start earning royalties on those free mints. So no, I don't think it really hurts at all.
And a great example of that is like, for example, Dan Romero, the co-founder of Farcaster, has released a few free mints, one of which was like a Farcaster OG NFT. It was free, and only around 2 people were even able to mint it. But now I think it's going on a floor price of like 2.5 ETH or something very extreme. Right now, I hope,
getting airdrops. If you have that, you got airdrops.
Right, a bunch of people got airdrops based on that. A bunch of people are getting airdrops on low FIDs, right? And so I think just earliness again is like a very hard thing to fake, and people who value that are able to show that value in the context of these NFTs. I think a large majority of them may end up having no financial value and just be like a stamp of like I was there to the timestamp point about Bitcoin. But the very few ones that do kind of represent a time in place that has high status, we'll see that value emerge in the price of the NFT.
I think that it's really interesting because, on the tech side, what's happening is this like emergence of L3s where transactions are, micro pennies. So there is a game on Farcaster called Crop.xyz. Every single action is like on chain. So I think what you'll see is a second order effect that, instead of these graphs and these events being siloed into these centralized platforms, anyone can recompose this network, right? So what I'm doing, listening to something, may not be valuable at the very beginning, but maybe a year down the line, an advertiser or someone sees that that's the target demo. And now you have a composable graph that's just on the shared database.
Right.
So I think that there's something there to this open graph social concept that I don't, in the current lens of monetization, we may miss if we don't keep an open mind in terms of what like social really means. And I think social means this interconnectedness to either media or to each other or to different affinity groups later on. And anyone permissionlessly can like grab chunks of that at any time. And so I think that then makes me think that like your address and identity is going to be kind of this next piece. And I think that's kind of what is happening at Yup here, right? Like tying your different social identities to like a wallet address. So I think that there's something there that becomes valuable at scale, and it's hard to just see it right now because we're so early.
And I think there's enormous amount of equality that comes from that. Like I would rather live in a world where people are making money and building status based on their actions, rather than maybe what they look like or what background they come from or what like social community like in a traditional sense they're tied to, but more like this is what I've done, this represents me, this is unchangeable no matter who would like to misconstrue this as being something else. And that just feels like a very kind of fair and equitable social network in various forms.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you say that too, because the second order effect is that identity is something that you cannot like really, for you internally as myself, I can identify as whatever, different people, but my race, my age, all of that is identity put on me. But on chain, I can be 100% intentional about
My actions speak for themselves, right?
Yeah. I love
yeah,
that.
so it's a reconstruction of identity, not based off of history, but based off of how I want the world to perceive me. Yeah, it's a little esoteric, but I think that
I love you're writing your own story. It's again back to that in a similar sense of the levelization, flattening of the curves of the world. It's doing the same thing for people who don't look they don't look like they should be successful. There's lots of studies that the way you look can affect your entire career path. And I love that there's a lot of levelization of that, the anon culture and just internet culture as well. So we're getting got a few minutes left. I want to get to our last question and then open it up for panels. So this question starts off for Nir, and then I want everybody to jump in. One of the things the last panel was talking about was Suji mentioned he was worried that in Web3 we were going to make the same mistakes they made, somewhat recently, where everyone was so focused on winning in the decentralization that they fought each other to death, and the movement died. It died on the vine. And so in the space, there's definitely a lot of really great social protocols, Lens and Farcaster being the largest, but we've done this before. We have EOS, DSO. There's been a lot of things, even in the Bitcoin community, that was attempting to do this. And it feels like we've had momentum this time, and it's really great. The funding's there, and high caliber teams to build great apps are there. And so the question to you, Nir, is where we have decentralized social protocols at the base, but we're starting to, I feel like, potentially see, especially in the Farcaster Warpcaster model, a potential winner-take-all approach at the centralized app layer. Are we still decentralized if that happens, and what can we do to make sure it doesn't happen?
I think that's happening to some extent. I mean, this stuff is really tiny. It's hard to kind of judge Warpcasts on what's worked really well for them, which is to focus on their client, right? I mean, they've built, I would say, the probably best consumer app in Web3 social, and it's led to the returns that we've seen. As another Farcaster client, we're enormously happy to see the total user base of Farcaster users 10x or 100x just solely because of Farcaster. I do believe that decentralization is the choice to opt in and the ability to opt out of these networks and these apps. So I do believe that if Dan Romero or the team at Warpcast was making really dictatorial type decisions, maybe the type we see Elon make around shadow banning, Tesla fudders and stuff like that people would rise up and build a different client and have the ability to do so, and that enough is decentralized for them to do so. I would point to some really interesting approaches to try to solve this stuff, though. I'm a very big fan of what Blue Sky is doing with their content moderation approach. So Blue Sky basically has, instead of one For You feed, an ecosystem, essentially an app store of free feeds that you can decide to subscribe to. And on the flip side, on the content moderation, they have what are called moderation lists, which sort of function like Twitter lists, but in the block sense, where instead of you having to block each individual user or kind of trust Blue Sky the app to decide who and what to shadow ban, you can subscribe to someone else's algorithm that is doing a really good job of, let's say, blocking all this large set of users that are talking about things in a certain way or have certain type of content that you as a user don't want. And so when you join something like Blue Sky, there's a default block list that you're subscribed to. That's what the team is choosing. But you have the ability to opt out of that block list and choose a different block list that you want to subscribe to. That's an enormous advantage, and I really see as a fair playing field in terms of how this stuff plays out. Certainly something that we at Yup plan on adopting at scale, and I think that kind of user choice and win by decentralization is the solution to these things, and something that I know the Farcaster community takes very seriously.
I would agree with that wholeheartedly. In the sense that as long as the protocol you can opt out, I think it's totally fine and fair for there to be a centralization factor, for Warpcast. There's so many benefits of the centralization piece that they can implement. that maybe is not like loved by the majority of people that are like hardcore decentralization people. But the important part is that the protocol underneath is completely decentralized, and you can always opt out of the Warpcast thing and build your own client that is, tailored to, better ideals. That's not what Dan Romero decides, right?
Sure. For the people who maybe aren't on Farcaster, or maybe we should unpack this a little bit.
Sure.
Nerfing. DWR, founder of Farcaster, who also runs the Warpcaster client, will talk about and tell people you're going to get nerfed in the algorithm if you're doing, in his opinion, bad behavior. Maybe a low quality reply, wow. Again, I want to press this point. I feel like personally that there's a risk of creating an echo chamber on Farcaster when no one's willing to push back against that. If we continue to allow founders of protocols like this to do things that feel dictator-like, maybe that's okay right now because, they're just building it and like we'll turn a blind eye and we get it, we're founders. But is it setting us up to be able to have the debate when we need to have the debate and it really matters? Or is that point, are they going to do it again and we're going to be okay because, they did it before?
Well, I think it's hard to compare it to Web2 social, where at any attempt to build a separate client for something like Twitter or Instagram, the entire client was nerfed. Like there was no attempt to really try to compete. And here there's like a real checks and balances. Like for example, at Yup, we don't nerf those same users. So if you do have a low quality reply and Dan and that team decide to nerf you at Yup, we see that as a suggestion. When we look at that API, that might be something we agree with and also want to nerf, but it's not something that by default we have to. And I strongly think that and the other thing to remember, I think for every user complaining that the nerfing is too centralizing, there's 100 users that are churning, meaning they're stopping to use any Farcaster client because of the low quality replies, or I think in many cases even more controversial things in the context of like misinformation, pornography, stuff like that users don't want to see. And so I do strongly believe that if there was demand for that content that they're choosing to stop, we would very quickly see clients emerge. I think the market share that Warpcast has in relation to these other clients is actually shrinking, not growing. And I think that's a very important kind of point to make in this thing. I think that will continue to be the case, especially as we see completely different mediums, like an Instagram-looking thing, whereas Warpcast is kind of more Twitter, Reddit. I think that's going to be like a very interesting impact here. And lastly, I would just say users having the choice, I think, is the most important. Like markets have a way of correcting themselves. I think the Farcaster team would not be making decisions that they think users don't want at scale. And just because I, as a Farcaster client, don't get to make those decisions for Warpcast, I think that's really important.
Now the crowd's potentially taking rights from someone, right? Like we have the Bill of Rights, and we have individual rights in the meat space for a reason. And so I think one of the biggest risks here is the crowd dictating individual rights, and we make the same mistakes that we've already seen occur in human history.
I kind of have an interesting take, and I think that decentralization is okay. You don't want decentralization for decentralization's sake, because I think that whatever happens with Warpcast, at the end of the day, I can take my graph with me. And I think that goes back to like everything being on chain eventually. I think next cycle, things are going to be cheap enough. Maybe not this cycle, but next cycle, things are going to be cheap enough where everything is on chain, whether it's an L3 or just verifiable credentials, assigned messages. It may not be on a blockchain, but it's verifiable. Right? And so you can take that with you, and anyone can like use that. And so this moment in time, Warpcast is the thing, but later on, it may not be. But the underlying graph is something that, like, because on Facebook or on X, I can't take my graph with me. I think that is important distinction. There.
I think we're going to see a lot of clients for specific audiences that want certain content, right? Like, I believe in a world where like Reddit and Twitter were decentralized. Reddit and Twitter, like, I don't know if many people know, but a large percentage of that content is porn. Like, I think Twitter may be like 20% porn. I'm fully confident that it's very high. Yeah, it's sarcastic. He's being sarcastic. I strongly believe that if Twitter was a protocol, there would be a porn client. There would just be a client for those that want that content, and I think there would be a crypto Twitter client. I think there would be a sports Twitter client, and those things would start to have their own decision making around content moderation. That isn't just a yes no, but like, is this relevant to what we're trying to serve? In the same way that Warpcast is doing now.
All right. I'm going to get a hold of this super panel. We have 10 minutes left. I do want to give time for people to ask questions. Nancy down here has the microphone. If you have any questions for the panel, please come up here. And if you want to direct it to one of us or to the group, just let us know. Thank you.
We can keep shit posting here, you know.
We could do it all day.
Keep going.
Is this going to be a pod, by the way?
Are we recording this?
We are. We can do it.
Let's put this baby
We should
on
do
train.
that.
Yeah.
I want to be the first mint, though. Don't try to front run me.
Thank
luck.
you for, I'm here. The question is around actually moderation and talking about SocialFi versus Web3 social. Do you see any opportunities to use like reward mechanisms to drive like users to auto-moderate or help with the moderation itself? So leveraging the casino-like gamification for basically making the app whatever better for that specific community.
Yeah, I would love to. On the Yup side, we have a token, and that token actually rewards people not just for earliness, but good taste. And so I think in the context of moderation, like if you're early to say that something is of value or not value, you'll actually be rewarded on Yup for that. And I see that as a form of moderation. But ultimately, I think leaving that up to the user, I really like what Blue Sky is doing here. And you could see people monetizing around that. Like, here's my moderation list that 20% of Blue Sky subscribes to, and now I'm going to charge $4.99 for that, for access to that moderation list, and that users would actually pay those kinds of things.
Yeah, I was just gonna add that like, I forgot it.
Right.
Yeah, no worries. So I think that this is a great game to play because, you know, if you get the incentive design correct and you have that sustainable model, I think that's what we're all looking for. Something that can meet short-term kind of like, okay, this content is relevant for me, but also sustains in the long term. And I think we're gonna have a whole generation of kids that are, you know, grew up playing an iPad that have game design thinking from like a very early age. And you're gonna see a lot of these experiments. I'm super excited to see how we can get this incentive alignment because really I think that's what, you know, Web3, crypto, whatever you want to call it is. It's like instead of everyone going inside and playing a video game, the video game economics are now in the real world. So I think there's that blurring and there's going to be some kid that is like, you know, 4 years old right now playing on his iPad thinking about, you know, innately these kind of things, old enough to be able to, in a permissionless way, kind of have a novel incentive mechanism for moderation.
And I remembered my point, and it was, you know, there's no reason why that shouldn't be a thing. And to the earlier discussion of like opening up moderation to become a multiplayer game is probably a really powerful primitive that will like really help any of these social clients, and it's totally possible. Like you have the ETH address, you can reward these people, you know, inherently for good actions. So I hope that happens, you know, sometime soon because multiplayer moderation would probably be like really powerful.
I do want to just want to make a caveat that like wealth is not the same thing as social value content. And I think both BitClout and Friends Tech have shown us this. Both of their feeds, I would argue, are some of the worst content moderated feeds because whales aren't necessarily good at creating tweets. Those things don't go hand in hand. So just tying it to a monetary value is not really going to give us the answer. We need to find a stronger mechanism that might reward the right people, but that isn't just tied to how much money you're willing to stake or how much money you can put on the table.
But even
I
just
think
like
financialization of moderation alone is a huge mistake. It has to have some social aspects as well.
No, but like
somewhere between Wikipedia and a financialized thing needs to probably be where we're at.
Yeah, but like people would do, you know, great moderation if they got the cool moderator badge, you know, that only you know a handful of people got, right? Like you can bake that into it. I wasn't saying that it necessarily has to be financialized, but there can also be, you know, there's very strong social rewards that you can do around that.
And there's a whole can of worms when it comes to AI and like tireless moderation tools now that can exist based off of, you know, kind kind of predictive analysis and intent. So
100%. To Near and Blue Sky, you said, I think we're going to head towards a world of diversity of algorithms. The client is just one thing that we can be diverse on. Diversity of algorithms and user trained algorithms, where there I think is going to probably over time lead to where most of the moderation actually occurs, while the signals it's digesting is just informing it. But that was a really great question. Thank you for that question.
Definitely.
Who here is still active on FriendTech?
Which one?
Friends Tech?
FriendTech?
Oh, no.
Anyone?
Any FriendTech people here? Go ahead.
Can't hear. Yeah.
The mic's not working, but we're going to relay it.
I got the gist of the question. Another great question. So her question was moderation as a multiplayer sport, and specifically in the reference to moderation where we're effectively self-regulating in her words. And I think the question she was asking is self-regulation and enough in an online world where she gave an example where online a woman in a metaverse was raped, and is that even rape? And so that's a very specific example that I'm not aware of, but I think it's a good question. What does everybody think?
Well, I think this is like a good point for decentralized social, in my opinion, which is like, I think government should definitely step in and regulate social and other apps in general. Like, I mean, it's such a big part of everybody's lives. I fully expect governments to do that. I think the advantage of having a decentralized protocol beneath that is that you can have a lot more variance in that censorship, meaning we should not be censoring American users based on China's standards of what things should be censored, but China's users should be able to use the same underlying social graph and content graph in the context of their app. And so I think it actually puts even more of an accountability on the clients, because they're the ones who are making kind of unilateral decisions on what's being shown on that specific client. But also at the same time allows for more variety and diversity, because across the world, different governments have different standards for this form of content moderation.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think that is kind of to the earlier discussion of like the decentralized protocol, what Nir was saying, and the centralized client. Like that's kind of on the client to set those guidelines of like what is okay and what's not, because what I think is okay might not necessarily be the same thing that Nir thinks is okay, that James thinks is okay, and Lawson thinks is okay. So obviously like a pure free-to-play multiplayer moderation doesn't necessarily work, but with guidelines from like some sort of centralized client, that becomes more powerful, right? So yeah.
I think that's a good place to end it. Great question. All right, thank you all for coming out to our panel, Web3 Social versus SocialFi. I am Lawson.FM. We have James Young up here, Collab.Land and Telefrens, Nir with yup.io, and Lucas with Pods. Check out all of our products. We appreciate you, and feel free to come up and ask any of us questions. Happy to chat.
Make sure to mint the pod when it comes out.
And mint the pod. Let's do a selfie over here.
All right.